Hello and a very warm welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now, living standards in the UK are below the EU average. Let me repeat that one more time and let it sink in. Living standards in the UK are below the EU average. In today's video, I'm going to give you 10 reasons why you should not invest in Brexit Britain, a country which, according to one British newspaper called The Telegraph, is fast becoming a basket case. So let's get straight down to it. Number one, lower standards of living. The UK is the only country in the G7 where living standards are still below pre-pandemic levels. Now, some will argue that there has been some growth in the economy, but when you take into account population increase, the picture is very bleak. Looking instead at GDP per capita, which is a better measurement, across the UK, this fell by 0.7% in 2023, and it's not grown since the first quarter of 2022. And this is the longest run of falls or stagnation since 1955. Indeed, in the last 10 years or so, most of the growth of the UK economy has been driven by population growth. Now, already stated at the beginning of the video was the fact that living standards have dropped below the EU average, and this is measured by GDP purchasing power parity, a measure which also takes into account the cost of living rather than just income per head. So, for example, in a country like the UK, income may be higher than a country, let's say like Italy, but the costs are also much higher. For example, a cappuccino in Italy may cost you on average around €1.50, but in the UK, it's going to cost you a hell of a lot more. Number two, let's talk about the high levels of debt. The UK's total government debt to GDP is now above 100%. Now, although there are other countries that have higher levels of government debt, the UK also has one of the highest household debts in Europe, far higher than countries like Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. And what is more worrying is that the UK's government debt is increasing and is now the 15th worst in the world at 105%. Number three, high taxation. The UK's current tax level burden is the highest rate in living memory, despite the recent cuts in national insurance. The total tax to GDP ratio across the UK has hit 35.3% as at year 2023 and is projected to hit 37.7% by 2029, according to the OECD. Now, one only needs to look at corporation tax, which increased from 19% to 25%, making the UK a less competitive country. It's now one of the highest corporation tax in Europe. And Ireland, for example's corporation tax is much lower at 12.5%. Even Scandinavian countries have lower rates of corporation tax than the UK. And also business rates are also extremely high in the UK, and that's seen many high street retailers having to shut shop. Now, on an individual level, capital gains tax allowance has also been reduced from £12,300 a year to just £3,000. And inheritance tax at 40% is also one of the highest in Europe. So I believe taxation is actually only going to get higher in the UK, making it a less competitive country and a country where you do not want to invest in. Number four, the lack of access to the single market. Now, Britain chose a hard Brexit and in doing so lost access to the single market and customs union. Bloomberg stated that this is costing the UK £100 billion a year in lost output. Now, almost all economists have stated that Brexit has harmed the UK economy and will continue to do so in the future. Goldman Sachs stated that Brexit has left the UK's economy 5% worse off in GDP terms. And an independent analysis from Cambridge Econometrics suggested that output is 6% smaller than it would have been if the UK had remained in the EU customs union and single market. Now, point number 5 kind of follows point number 4. So we want to talk about the lack of significant free trade deals. Now, the free trade deals signed since leaving the EU by the UK have been, to say the least, underwhelming. Trade deals with Australia, New Zealand, and Japan are not going to add much to the GDP growth of the UK economy, if anything at all. And even the most significant trade deal signed to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership will only add about 0.1% GDP growth, and this is over 10 years. So again, virtually nothing. And unfortunately, there are no signs of any free trade deals with either the US or India. Now, point number 6, I want to talk about the UK looking more like an inward looking country. Now, one criticism that is often labelled at the EU is that it discourages member states from issuing golden visas, i.e., passports, in exchange for significant donations from individuals. However, the UK, having left the EU, scrapped the investor visa, which offered fast track residency to foreign investors. Now, the UK is also struggling to attract foreign direct investment, with projects down nearly 30% from a peak in 2016 2017. And this is according to the government's own figures. Number 7, and this is very important, I want to talk about a collapsing infrastructure. The UK's infrastructure is collapsing. School buildings are crumbling. There are potholes on roads throughout the country. But worst of all, there are more than 7.5 million people in England alone on a waiting list for hospital treatment. This is an almost unbelievable figure. Now, just to put this in perspective, we are talking about 1 in 7 of the population. So Brexit Britain is literally the sick man of Europe. Number 8, I want to talk about politicians. Now, I have to admit, on this channel, I don't like talking about politics. But I think in this case with Britain, you have to, because I think in the last 10 years or so, Britain has had a really, really bad set of politicians. And many would argue they are the worst politicians in British history. Number 9, I want to talk about Britain being a divided society. And I don't just mean in economic terms. I would have to say, unfortunately, in Brexit Britain, points of view seem to be becoming ever more extreme, ranging from being told off for calling a female who acts an actress to telling refugees to F off back to France. Now, when you hear this type of language, um, this makes you less likely to invest in a country. Um, Most investors don't like a country which is divided and infighting. And this is what seems to be happening in the UK at the moment. And finally, number 10, I want to talk about the UK's future prospects, which don't look very good. I would say the prospects of the UK look actually quite bleak. It's likely that a new Labour government will come into power by early 2025, and I think we're likely to see even higher taxation. There's likely to be higher capital gains tax, and it's unlikely there will be a path to rejoining the EU. And I think one other thing is that Britain is unlikely to get good free trade deals in the future. So you're looking at the worst of all worlds, the UK. It's left the single market and customs union and is really losing out. And it's not getting any good free trade deals with other countries. So in effect, you've got the worst of all worlds and higher taxation as a result. And one other sad thing I have to add, Britain is starting to see a bit of a brain drain. So A lot of people, in particular younger professionals, are now looking to work elsewhere. In particular, doctors. And the UK has actually seen a lot of strikes in the hospital sector and indeed other sectors like the rail sector, which is quite unprecedented for a country like the UK. And if more doctors leave, you're going to have an even more unhealthy society, and that's not good for GDP growth. Anyway, sorry for posting such a negative video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with me that Brexit Britain, at least in the medium term, has quite a bleak future? I would love to know your thoughts. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks ever so much for watching this video, and I shall see you very soon on the next.